I'd like to welcome up our first speaker of the day, Guil Hernandez. Guil is a senior software development instructor at Treehouse, leading content creation for full stack JavaScript and front end web development. I've been taking courses from Guil recently since I enrolled in our full stack JavaScript tech degree, and he is a delightful and skilled instructor. Love you, Guil. He's passionate about learning and empowering folks through technology education and mentoring. Guil enjoys speaking about learning and programming at local meetups and conferences across the US. When Guil is not recording or writing about code, you'll find him running and exploring the South Florida waters on a paddleboard or kayak. Welcome, Guil.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and good morning, afternoon, or even evening, everyone, wherever you may be. Super excited to be kicking off our first home conference, Treehouse Festival. And of course, hoping that all of you are doing well and safe out there. And I want to start off by saying thank you. I deeply thank you for being Treehouse students, also our guests, and really for supporting us in our mission over the years. Some of you from the very beginning. Now, some of you might know me. I'm Guil. I'm a software development instructor at Treehouse, and I've been at Treehouse creating courses for over 8 years. And I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. So besides creating content, I've probably spent just as much time or more really learning, and most of which has been online. In fact, almost everything I learned about programming has been online in a self-regulated style. So for example, that's some of the more recent Python learning I've been doing. Now, most of the talks or presentations I give are usually technical, but today I'm super delighted to spend some time with you sharing what I've learned about learning, as well as some best practices and strategies to help you succeed in your online learning journey. So these are some things I found worked for me, as well as many of my colleagues and the students we've taught through the years. So this is our story. So we all have different reasons or motivations for wanting to learn something, right? Maybe it's to start a career or change careers, or perhaps it's for professional development. You want to skill up and get a promotion. It could be to fill knowledge gaps. You want to stay relevant and competitive as technology changes. Or you're a lifelong learner, right? You're always looking to learn new subjects and continuously updating and building your new skill sets. So we can spend hours and hours learning, but if we're not able to recall, retrieve, or demonstrate what we've learned in some way, we're doing ourselves a major disservice, and it's going to take longer and longer to achieve our learning goals. Now, for many, online learning feels more appropriate, right? Because it's flexible and convenient, while others might prefer the structure of classroom learning. Although nowadays we might not have that choice, right? During this time of COVID-19 comes change, more stress. There's likely to be more hurdles, distractions, and unknowns that come with learning online, especially if it's new to you. But the way we learn impacts our ability to remember what we're learning. In fact, there's this well-known theory on education retention called the forgetting curve. And it was discovered that without proper learning habits or making an attempt to retain information, we forget roughly 56% of what we learn in 1 hour, then 66% after a day, and then 75% after 6 days. That's a lot of forgetting. So bearing that in mind, how do we combat this forgetting curve in long online learning specifically? So I'll start by focusing on two key distinct processes, learning and memory. They're closely connected, and people often confuse them with each other, but they're different. Learning has to do with the act or process of acquiring new skills or knowledge, while memory is our ability to take that information in, then store, retain, and then be able to recall and apply that information, right? It's an expression of what we've learned. And memory plays a crucial role in learning. So it turns out that when you learn, there are three main processes that deal with getting what you're learning into memory and keeping it there: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So encoding, it's all about taking in new information, understanding it, and transforming it into a form that can be stored in memory. And storage is when you're maintaining that information in memory, and long-term memory being the ultimate goal. And then retrieval, how you access the information that's been encoded and stored so that you can apply it. So let's keep these three processes in mind through our time together here, right? Encoding, storage, and retrieval. And we all have different learning styles and preferences, but these three processes tend to work more effectively when the educational experience is designed for our preferred learning style. And there are a few different types of online learning models. I'm going to talk specifically about an asynchronous learning model that's self-regulated, so it's entirely flexible, and you conveniently study in your preferred environment at your own pace and time. Those of you who are Treehouse students are probably familiar with this model, right? So this type of online learning does not take place in real time. It consists of recorded videos and lessons. Maybe you're provided assessments and projects that you complete on your own time. But overall, you monitor and control your own learning and outcomes. It's self-regulated. Now, with that comes some responsibility, right? You need to be able to learn independently while holding a higher level of accountability for your own learning. So when you're in control of your learning experience and environment, there can be lots of factors that can affect engagement and accountability, right? Like finding the time. There might be technical constraints, or you're passively learning versus actively, which I'll get into later. There can be distractions in your learning environment. Perhaps there are other commitments you need to attend to, and lots more. So it can be challenging to self-regulate, right? Plan for learning, monitor your performance, let alone reflect on and evaluate outcomes. So all of these factors in some way affect memory. It actually plays into that forgetting curve I talked about earlier. And if what you're learning is not sticking, then you might start to feel a lack of progress and then productivity and motivation. And that often leads to giving up. And we don't want that. So how can we best support ourselves to get the most out of online learning, right? And become more aware of our learning process so we can effectively develop new skills and in a way we can retain and apply them. So when you're learning, encoding the material depends on a few factors related to your environment, also how you're consuming the material, and a few other variables like your health, state of rest, and more. So first, let's get into some tips on how to help you, how to support you in online learning, right? So these tips are about supporting you in your online learnings, and we're going to look at ways to plan for learning online, self-care, manage your time, and staying motivated. So it all starts with your learning environment, right? The conditions under which you're learning influence how you're encoding that information. Your environment can either stimulate or inhibit learning. So first, create a distinct learning space for learning, right? So if possible, try to make it a space that you don't use frequently for other activities like watching TV, sleeping, eating, or anything that might cause unnecessary distractions, right? Because minimizing distractions is crucial and significant to learning and that memorization process. And you're also less likely to procrastinate if you've created a designated learning space away from distractions. So avoid social media notifications, keep the TV off, podcasts, or even music with lyrics that can interrupt your learning. And in fact, those can all be used as small rewards later for when you've completed a learning task or milestone, which I'll talk about in a bit. And yeah, make your learning space comfortable. Ergonomics play a key role. So it helps if it's well lit with natural light, that it's quiet, organized with ergonomic seating. Now, sitting on a bed or if you're slouched on the couch seems comfortable, but it's probably not going to help maximize your concentration. And other subjective factors that influence learning and memorization are your state of rest and your health and diet. So try to get your mind and body in the healthiest possible way it can be for learning. It's actually proven to support your ability to learn. You might think that sleeping can be a bit of a waste of time or that you're being lazy. No, sleep is one of the most important ways to keep your brain clean and healthy. And a good night's sleep before intensive and immersive learning can be powerful. It restores your mind and body. Now, a really interesting thing about sleeping is that studies suggest that during sleep, your brain can organize and sort out some of the ideas and concepts you're thinking about in learning. Pretty cool. So yeah, for most folks, 7 to 9 hours is the recommended amount of sleep you should be getting. It makes a difference if you can do it. And this leads to health and nutrition, which are also key to keeping your mind and body healthy. So if you can, be sure to keep plenty of water nearby in your designated learning space and even some healthy snacks to supercharge your studies. It's hard to focus when you're hungry and sleepy. Now, self-regulated online learning is flexible, but it does present challenges when it comes to scheduling learning time and time management. You might find that it's tough to get into a routine, which is often a big hurdle. So if you're serious about getting the most out of your learning time, create a schedule. Create a learning habit by setting aside dedicated time for learning. Many of us have work or exercise schedules and routines, and learning is no different. So set up a consistent schedule and routine for studying, right? You might treat it like an actual class that you signed up for and you need to be there in person. So, and on the days that you can, you might even want to buy yourself a little extra time by waking up earlier for quiet learning and study time. And I also recommend assigning learning goals and tasks to dates. That's important. And there's lots of useful tools you can use to keep track of your learning tasks and goals. Ones I've used in the past are Google Calendar and Docs, Asana and Trello, which I like. So, for example, this is part of a old school learning schedule that I created a while ago when I was learning React, a JavaScript library. So a simple Google Doc with some time blocked off in my calendar really worked for me. And in fact, learning React was career changing too at that time. And most importantly, pace yourself, right? So a common question I get from students is, what's a realistic schedule or timetable for learning? Well, it helps to create a schedule where you spread out your learning time. Binge learning or cramming is not going to be effective for you. And we'll get into this more in a few, but it's been proven that scheduling two separate study sessions with a good amount of time between the sessions is more effective than scheduling one study session of the same long total time length. So learning more frequently, but for less time is actually better than cramming your studies into one long session. So when you're learning at home, right, there might be a lot of time when you're just sitting and staring at a screen. So be sure to give your mind and body some time away from the glowing rectangle, if you will, by scheduling regular breaks effectively. And I say schedule breaks, right, because it's easier to get into procrastination mode, distracted, or lose motivation if you're doing like an hour or even a 2 hour long learning session with no break in sight. So schedule breaks, distractions, and rewards even. After hitting a learning milestone, chill out a bit. Check your phone, social media, email, do something you enjoy. Now, a good study break, I found, should probably not be another way to get into procrastinating, right? So maybe it's not the time to start watching a movie or Netflix show or eat a big meal if you're in the middle of studying. What I like to do is going for a walk and playing with my awesome dog, Joey. That's her right there. I just had to get her in my slides. Or yeah, just stretching and having a snack with some coffee, right? I return back fresh and focused and ready to go. Now, one solid technique I found to help me and students stay focused and motivated and avoid procrastination during extended periods of learning and studying is the good old Pomodoro or tomato timer technique. So it turns out that when studying for longer periods, our brain doesn't actually retain its efficiency during those long periods. So short, intense bursts of learning tend to be more effective. And what you can do is set a timer. It doesn't have to be a tomato, any timer. You set the timer for 25 minutes or 30, and you start your task. When time's up, you take a short 3 to 5 minute break. Then after 4 of those Pomodoro cycles, you take a longer break, like 15, maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And your brain is going to use that time to absorb the new information. Then you can reset and start that process again if needed. All right. So you've planned for learning, you have your learning space, you're getting enough sleep, and you've even set a schedule, all to help you better process and encode information. So now it comes down to learning itself, right? My favorite part, and how to best store this information into memory. So another common question I get from students is, what's the best way to retain what I'm learning and putting it into practice, right? So in online learning, you're probably going to be watching a whole lot of videos or reading through tutorials. So the single most important thing I can encourage you to do is to be an active learner versus a passive learner. So active learning is when you're actively involved in the learning process and Passive learning is the opposite, when all you're doing is watching, hearing, or reading the material. It's more of a one-way effort. Now, in self-regulated online learning, it's easier to fall into this passive learning trap, and I see it happen all the time. So learning is an active and strategic activity, and it's difficult to retain information through passive learning. So you might think that you understand a lesson and the concepts being taught by just watching, but then you'll find that you later struggle putting it all into practice. And sometimes, no matter how clear an explanation, the explanations might be, you can't get anything to work when you try it later on, right? A lot of us have been there before. I have. So that's usually because you're taking that information in superficially at face value. So a lot of times, if it's new, complex information, like a lot is in programming, for instance, you're only just absorbing abstract concepts. So lean forward and engage with the material. If it's a programming course, code along with the instructor, review any supplemental notes and resources. Also look for practice opportunities related to the lesson, or better yet, get involved in a community discussion. To make what you're learning stick, you need to make sure that you form your own interpretation of what was taught and that it's accurate, right? And you also need to run into difficulty, making mistakes, breaking things, then identify and correct them. That's all part of the process. So what you're doing is you're converting that knowledge from abstract to practical. And that's important, because what happens is it's no longer something someone else has told you, right? You own that knowledge, and that's super powerful. And all that is part of what helps with that, it helps with that second process involved in memory that I talked about earlier, storing or maintaining information in memory, right? It's easy to forget what you don't understand, so be an active learner. Now, you can take active learning even further, too, by integrating higher order thinking into your learning habits. And I know it sounds pretty intense, but it's actually the levels of thinking we tend to have in mind when designing courses for you students at Treehouse. So, for example, there's recall, apply, create, and this is a whole other talk on its own, but I'll leave you with some cool resources on this learning framework called Bloom's taxonomy. And what it does, it helps you move beyond just remembering and recalling information and deeper into application, analysis, synthesis, and more. And what it really helps long-term retention. All right, good. So what else can we do to best make what we're learning stick, right? Well, certainly not cramming. I mentioned earlier how binge learning is not effective. So when you cram, you study for a long, intense period of time. And it's pretty good for getting information into short-term memory, but not long-term memory. It actually makes it difficult to retrieve that information later on, and it could lead to confusion. So it turns out that our brains learn more effectively, as I touched on earlier, when we space out our learning over time. It's called the spacing effect. So one really effective learning strategy is spaced repetition, or spaced learning. So instead of cramming one big new topic and any related concepts in one go, you can cover the topic in segments over multiple lessons. You space it out. So for example, let's say you try to repeat or practice something 10 times in one afternoon. That's not going to stick compared to how it would if you practice, say, 10 times over the span of a few days, right? And you can also plan for spaced learning in your learning schedule. Allow for a period of time to pass. It can be a couple of days, weeks, or even months, depending on the complexity of the material. And then review or practice the same concept again. By repeatedly learning and recalling information over an extended period of time, you'll be more likely to retain that information. So it's an effective way to combat that forgetting curve I talked about earlier. And some students might use spaced learning like this, right? They'll learn something in the first lesson, then in the next session, recall concepts, then apply them in the next session. Or, for example, for you Treehouse students, you might revisit a quiz or a specific code challenge or even a practice session after a few days or weeks, right? Just when you think you're about to forget the thing, or maybe before you proceed with learning a new major concept, and just see how much you can recall and apply. It really helps you assess your own progress too. Cool. So a good analogy I heard about this is that when you're building a brick structure, right? For example, you need to allow for time for the concrete that supports the building to dry and solidify before you continue to be able to build on top of it, right? Build the rest out. So cramming creates a shaky foundation in the concepts you're learning. And conversely, spaced repetition gives your mind time to form connections between ideas and concepts, which allows you to effectively build knowledge on top of what you've learned. So all of this helps to shape that third main process I've talked about in regards to memory. That's retrieval. So good, we're in that retrieval process now, being able to reaccess information that you've encoded and stored. So now let's have a look at active learning strategies to help you with retrieval. First is reflection. So after you learn something new, ask yourself, what are the main concepts and key ideas I just learned? And can I explain them in my own words, right? You also might want to step away and see what you can recall from memory. I do this all the time. Take a walk and talk it out loud in your own words, and you maybe might want to write them down as well. Now, doing that is actually more effective than rereading or rewatching something over and over again until you think you get it, right? And you're not expected to remember every detail, right? That's what Google, Stack Overflow, and Twitter are for. So rely on your resources. And I emphasize remembering the key ideas and concepts because what it does is it helps you begin forming chunks of memory by way of this process called chunking. These tiny packages or chunks of information your mind can easily access and pull from, right? So the more chunks of key ideas you can remember, the easier it becomes for your mind to group several related chunks of information together. And then for you, instead of struggling to recall tiny details of information, you recall a chunk or an entire group. And then you can retrieve something from that group more easily. Also, ask yourself, can I relate what I'm learning to something I already know? That's important. So see if you can draw connections between new information and what you know about something else, right? Connecting what you're learning to real life experiences and knowledge results in more durable learning. So for instance, I recently started diving back into Python, and I instantly tried relating the basics and key ideas to what I might already know in JavaScript, which I have more experience with. So I started taking notes of these similarities in my own words, and the JavaScript knowledge that I already had stored in memory provided a faster on-ramp to Python and deepened my understanding of it. So after adapting these active learning techniques for some time, you're more likely to recognize when what you're learning and studying doesn't make sense. And at that moment, you can stop, regroup, figure it out, rather than passively just continuing on with the next lesson, right? Or the next thing to learn. And from there, you can really start developing demonstrable expert level skills. You can key in on your weaknesses and train to reduce them with something called deliberate practice. It's practicing with a purpose, with the specific goal of getting better. And I also love talking about this topic, but it's a whole other talk on its own. But I'll leave you with some really cool resources on it that you can check out in my slides at the end. So the takeaway so far is that if you are strategic in your learning, you're going to be more successful than those who are not deliberate and those who do not reflect on the learning process. So in online learning, you're going to be uncomfortable, right? And when learning something new and complex, especially if you're by yourself, and learning alone can feel isolating and maybe a bit more daunting, right? Especially if it's new to you and if you start feeling stuck. So while you're learning asynchronously, try to find a synchronous cohort. Finding and connecting with peers can improve your online learning experience and boost your learning outcomes. You can all start to make sense of all these new ideas you're learning together. So at Treehouse, for example, there are hundreds or thousands of other students who are learning the exact same thing you're learning at the same time. And if you're stuck or feeling a lack of productivity, you might be relieved to know that others are asking the same questions and maybe having similar hurdles in their learning journey. And some might have just been through some of the things you're struggling with and can provide help getting you unstuck. Then, you might provide that same help to another peer. Cool. So connecting with learning peers can help you stay motivated. And as I mentioned, I think it provides a more vibrant experience. You can share your learning goals, study tips, and other fun and interesting things. And best of all, it provides support and accountability, right? You'll have other folks who you can explain concepts to in your own words, and you can keep each other on track. And what I think it helps because it challenges you to think critically about those concepts. And best of all, online learning connects you to world-class instructors and like-minded, passionate folks like you. So take advantage of it. There's some really awesome community-driven challenges and group discussions you can join. My favorite are the 100 Days of Code Challenge. There's also Code Newbie, which I love. They have a Twitter chat every Wednesday where anyone can join and talk about interesting coding topics. It's a lot of fun. All right, friends, I can talk so much more about learning, but that's about all the time I have for you today. But I'll leave you with a few more things to keep in mind. So once you develop effective learning habits, keep it going, right? Have a growth mindset. Continue working to develop and improve your intelligence. It's not a fixed trait, right? So, you're not going to know everything either about Python, JavaScript, CSS, design, for example. Nobody does. So that's why I love this quote. It's essentially the things we're sure of are what keep us from seeing and learning. So embrace that there will be lots of things you don't know, and that will keep you curious, motivated, and engaged in online learning. And share what you know, even while you're learning it. So for instance, while I was learning Python and taking those notes while relating it to JavaScript, I created this blog for the Treehouse blog, and it helped make others form those connections, right? And this right here, I'm an imposter. That's a normal feeling. So that just means that you care and that you're aware. If you never feel this way, then heads up, that might keep you from listening, learning, and growing. And finally, have fun. Enjoy your learning journey. The more you make learning a routine, the easier it becomes and the more natural it will feel. Happy learning, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guil. You're my hero. Really, really appreciate you sharing an immense amount of knowledge about how to be successful learning online. Everyone, we have another amazing session for you right now. So stick around, hop in the chat. I'm so happy you're here. Thanks.